All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Angela Brooks. I'm DISYS' Manager of Global Marketing. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar on testing and quality assurance using outcome-based pricing model. We have two excellent speakers with us today, Fernando Abreu and Tisa Clark. Fernando is our DISYS Global Outsourcing Program Manager. He's been with DISYS for 2 years. And among other certifications, he is a PMP and ITIL certified person. He has 13 years of experience in IT and the software development lifecycle, including 6 years of experience in IT consulting and project management. He also brings experience in outsourcing operations, especially in Brazil, where he's from.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Fernando. Tisa, she's a testing expert and DISYS fellow. She's part of our expert network program, and we're glad she's here with us today. She's also PMP certified and has 16 years of experience in testing and IT, working with various platforms from mainframe to client server, and working in various industries, including transportation, finance, securities, automotive, and supply chain management, to name just a few. Fernando and Tisa, thanks again for being with us today. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Angela, for having us. I'm really excited about the information that we're going to be sharing with some of your clients and potential clients today.
Thank you very much, Angela. This is the first time that we are having our webinar here with DISYS. My first time presenting, the fourth one for DISYS. So it's very good to be here and participating in the February topic.
Thank you both. This is excellent. Just to jumpstart our discussion today, I wanted to provide our audience with some of the responses and feedback to the registration survey questions that you answered. Our first question was, what's your biggest testing or QA pain point? And as you can see here, productivity came in first, followed by resources. So the actual outcome-based model that we'll be discussing today hits on these two areas specifically, and just out of a point of curiosity, cost came in at 0. That's your lowest pain point. Our second question was, have you worked with an outcome-based pricing model for testing and QA previously? And as you can see, about half of the respondents, half of you, have not even heard of this model. So this webinar will be an excellent introduction to it, and to this concept. That was followed by 36% who've heard of it but have no experience with it. So again, this webinar should be an excellent introduction to how it can be applied to testing and QA. Before I turn the webinar over to Fernando and Tisa, I would like to just let you know that as you have questions today, you can log them into the chat area of your screen that's on the side of your monitor. You can also expect us to send out a link to this webinar recording within the next 24 hours. So you should be able to take a look at slides and have a copy of it then. Thanks again for being with us today, and take it over, Fernando. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Angela. The both concepts that we are discussing today in our webinar are the outcome-based model and testing and QA. The purpose here is to individually tell apart these both concepts and give some food for thought about the things that we need to implement to have them both as their own. But the objective here is to have them both mingle together so we can have an idea on how to implement the outcome-based model towards testing and QA in your organization. That's the objective of this webinar. So to start with the outcome-based model, we're going to be talking about the approach to pricing, how companies can ask suppliers to bring testing using outcome-based model, as well with how do you differentiate from the other methods that we use as far as time material or SOWs when we are implementing services inside your companies. A key point here is acceptance criteria and the productivity offsetting the body count. We don't want to talk about body count. We want to talk about productivity and the services and the deliverables that this model brings to the table. Well, bringing it to QA and testing, we want to talk about traditional methods on how to implement or how to use testing. We want to talk about one of the best practices in the industry, what is all about testing, and also technology, techniques, and the methodology in the life cycle. The reason we want to talk about methodology and life cycle is to show during the testing phases what are the deliverables that we're going to implement to have the outcome-based model in place inside your organization. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about the outcome-based model itself. It's going to be a brief introduction where we're going to understand how to take from the regular staffing org time and material approach, or moving a little bit further, the SOW approach, and mingle them together to have a better service or to have a better model, which is the outcome-based model. Okay? So, of course, as everybody somehow or sometime back in the past has used staffing augmentation services, you can always rely on the time and material approach. Why? Because this approach makes it possible for you to have rapid turnarounds. It can be quickly scaled up or down, and this is also a way to leverage mix of talent. So basically, when you have a problem to be solved, but you don't have enough time internally to describe how the problem can be solved or how to implement the solution, you can rapidly bring somebody on board using staff augmentation and time material, and you can have that work done by the expert. And in the other hand, when you use SOW approach, so you actually have time to define the things that you need to be done, and then you don't kill time with time and material because you are mitigating the risk of having somebody on board that has to be managed, but the services or the solution that has to be developed are going to be discovered on the fly. So SOW, it manages the risk mitigation of what is this person be going to do in here, or what is this SME, subject matter expertise, are going to be doing here in our structure. So those are the both concepts that we can use for staffing augmentation, time and material, SOW, and we are trying to create an outcome-based model which is trying to mingle both concepts, okay? So what are we bringing to the outcome-based model approach from TNM and SOW? So we can actually, the same way we do on SOW, we can break down the deliverables that we're going to have to be as the outcomes from our service. Also, and this is a key point as far as paying, the services are going to be only paid when the deliverables are accepted. So there's a huge key point here as far as defining what are the acceptance criteria to make sure a product or a deliverable come into place and is delivered to the customer. And when delivered and when it's satisfactory, it's paid, and only at that point. Another key point here is the upfront cost that you're not having. So the minute you have somebody coming on board in a staffing augmentation model, you're going to start paying, for example, because the taximeter is counting. If you have an outcome-based model, you're going to have a go-to structure where you can rely on the services that you are asking. It's like in going to the shelf, and then what do I want here? And once you use what you're wanting, then you start paying because this is a product that you are receiving and bringing back to your home. Of course, as far as the scalability, it's also very scalable because you are relying on volume. You are relying on how much demand you have to your services structure to deliver the product. And of course, as you can define what are the deliverables that are going to be provided, you can transfer the risk of actually creating and producing the deliverables to the vendor or to the expert that is at place. Just to give a few and just a short example on how to implement this, let's just say we have a software development structure where it's expected to have 300 automated test scripts written. Well, after the production or during the execution phase that we're going to see, they all go through acceptance. And after the acceptance, if only 290 have been accepted, those are the only ones that the customer are going to be paying. And the other 10 ones that were not accepted are going to have to go to rework. So that's the whole idea about paying as you go, and paying as you go as you accept the things that you are receiving from your supplier, from your vendor. So to implement this model that we just had like a glance about, we can have a 4-step roadmap where we can implement. And this is key also as we go further on the presentation to keep these 4 steps in here, because we're going to be relating them to the testing and QA life cycle further on the presentation with TISA. So the first step to implement an outcome-based model is to, of course, evaluate and propose what are the deliverables that are going to be included inside the testing life cycle. You need to make sure you understand how you can measure productivity, who are the key members or the key team members that you're going to need inside your team to be providing that project or that service to your customer. It's very important to have an iteration through the process to reach detail on type and range of services desired, because you're going to need to make sure everybody is aware of the deliverables that are going to be presented during when the service is actually implemented. Another key point here, as usual, when we have an outsourced solution, we need to talk about service level agreements and the deliverable price range, because they're going to vary as far as the outcomes start coming from the operation. The second step is the acceptance criteria. And this is very important to pay attention to this point, because whenever you're going to sit down with your vendor, it needs to pay attention to the criteria that is going to be implemented to each of the deliverables that are going to be out of the outcome-based model. So defining the criteria that you're going to use to accept internally your deliverable is key to make sure that the operation is running. Because at the same time that you are transferring the risk to your supplier, you don't want him or her making or feeling pressured about the things that he has to deliver if he never knows when it's going to get accepted, because there's a whole structure behind the service that is being provided that has to be accepted so actually the supplier gets paid. So criteria has to be signed off on by both parts, so they make sure what is the criteria to accept one or two or a set of deliverables. Here is also where we define the change management framework, because once you implement a solution like this, and usually you have a pilot timing for this solution, you are always finding out or discovering new things or new measurements or new metrics that you can implement into your structure, and you want to be flexible to implement new items when you are further down on execution. So it's also key to keep in mind that you have to implement a change management framework where everybody knows how to change a criteria, how to change a deliverable, or how to change the way acceptance works inside the operation. As we move down to step number 3, here's the actual execution. So if we're talking about an outcome-based model, we are understanding there is like a factory in place to provide the services. So here are my requirements, here's what I need to be done, and here's the outcome that is coming from the factory. So the factory is also just now relating to testing techniques. It's almost a black box where you are asking something to be done, and then you just get the outcome once the service or the deliverable is prepared to be signed off. So one key point here as well, it's a black box, but of course there has to be a lot of transparency. So that's the reason usually organizations are going to be asking for the supplier to provide a key point of contact to be usually the operations manager. Execution is also where we are bringing the pricing point back to the table, and then only the outcomes that are accepted during the month or semi-monthly or in any other timely fashion, we're going to be billing the customer for that. So unaccepted items, they return for rework, and this is the job from the supplier to manage the demand that they are having during that month, to make sure that let's just say back to our example, the 10 items that had to go back to rework, they're going to be redeployed, and then they're going to be billed in the following month because they were not accepted before. During execution, because we want to keep customer aware of what's going on in the operation, we need to implement a reporting framework for client satisfaction. So we need to provide daily reporting, weekly reporting, monthly reporting, and I'm going to be talking about it further a little bit. But we need to keep in touch with the customer to tell what are the productivity or what are the deliverables that are coming out of the operation, because we don't want to be by the end of the month and we don't have a clue about what are the things that are done, what is the progress that I'm having, and how productivity, and this is a huge point for clients, how is the productivity improving so your final pricing can somehow further down the road decrease because you're getting more expert on the way you provide services. The last item from our framework is, of course, review and adjust. You are always willing to have a PDCA process on top of your project or on top of your services, and then teams have to regularly meet with client representatives. So we are making sure that the things that we agreed in the beginning, back to step 1, they are executed in step 3, but you keep in touch to make sure you make it better as far as a service, or you make it more productive as far as including demand, taking demand out there, making it scalable the way you want. Because here, the customer is buying what they need to have. They are buying as they want. They are not just having a whole number of people working for them, and they are paying for the amount of hours that has been worked. So that's the whole idea, and that's the reason we want to keep reviewing and adjusting the governance model that you employed for your operation. Okay? So this is like the 4 steps for us to implement the outcome-based model approach. And from this point on, we're going to be touching base with TISA on testing and QA's aspects.
Thank you so much, Fernando. That was an excellent introduction into the outcome-based testing model approach and how we now can shift into ensuring we're all baselined relative to what testing is. And then we'll in turn cover how do we take the standard testing lifecycle and move into the outcome-based model. So if we move into what we are traditionally familiar with, which is the traditional waterfall testing method. This is where we take and move from analysis into design, and the testing teams are working along with the development and technical team members to craft the test plan and develop test cases, and then we don't move into actual execution until after the code is finished. Then we move into implementation once all the testing and rework has been done, and then we push that into production. This is what we're typically familiar with, and it has its place and it's appropriate in some arenas, but we in turn have learned that with this particular waterfall method that sometimes you lose the ability to work back into the process, the things that you're finding out, the lessons that you're learning as you move through the traditional waterfall testing methodology. So this in turn is some of the thought process that has gone into establishing a testing center of excellence framework. So as you can see from this visual depiction in front of you, that at the core or at the center of the process, we have 4 major components. Clearly, people are very, very important in ensuring that you have the right skill sets, that you have the right types of individuals, that they in turn are equipped to support your environment, the industry that you're supporting, the solutions that you're trying to implement to solve your business problems, and followed by the process that they undertake to ensure that we have repeatable processes, that we ensure have all of the required artifacts. We're following internal and external procedures and regulations, that you have a governance program, to ensure that everyone is following the process, that you have your checks and balances in place, and followed by the technology that you're using to pull all of this together. So as we see, these are your 4 key components to any framework that you're looking to stand up in regards to testing and quality assurance. And around that, that supports that core, if you will, are your various characteristics of retention of your people, training of your people, the different test functions and quality assurance of your process, that continuous improvement that Fernando spoke about in the outcome-based model as you're reworking it to work toward your environment. As we're looking at the technology to say, when is automation appropriate, when is not appropriate, what templates are we using? Is this the best practice around those templates? Are we using the best tools to support our efforts? On the governance, what are the metrics and measurements that we're using? Are we feeding that up to the upper level management? Are they seeing that in a dashboard format to be able to make educated and informed decisions? So in turn, you have a framework that then thus becomes scalable to, in turn, detect earlier in the life cycle defects, so that you lower your costs up front, you minimize your rework and your repair items as you move through the life cycle, and you optimize your entire process with the use of technology. So when we look at that, let's look at some of the different technologies that have been and processes that have been introduced to our industry. So we have the RUP, or Rational Unified Process, that in turn introduced a methodology that played on technology. So environments that in turn are using modeling techniques, they in turn promoted a testing methodology that worked alongside of that you could in turn, as you began to model your systems, that you would in turn develop your test procedures and your test sets to correlate to the modeling framework that you've introduced, and that you in turn would have your testing and you would have your development, and all of the back and forth and iterations around that feed right into your one system. And so this was one of the iterative approaches that was introduced to combat that whole waterfall, can't move forward until we finish this phase, or can't move forward until we minimize this stage, because we found that in some cases you need to go through gyrations of iterations in order to make it work and get a solution to the table. We also have the infamous V model. Here is where you in turn look at testing as a whole and how it correlates to the full life cycle, and how you would look through the traditional life cycle of your requirements analysis, gathering of your specifications, high-level design and detailed design, and down to coding. And then from that, you erect the unit testing and the integration testing and system testing and acceptance testing, and how you correlate the two, how you have your various testing exercises validating different aspects of the earlier life cycles. And then most recently, the new introduction of the agile, or test development-driven testing. And this is where you're actually developing the code, and you're developing the solution based on being able to test it as you build it. And so there has been some great findings out of this particular methodology. So these are just some of the different types of methodologies that are out there that could be employed by the vendor in based testing model. So when we take a look at that, let's take a look even further into the end-to-end testing methodology, and let's look at what does that consist of. So clearly, testing starts just as the system development lifecycle in initiation. Then it moves into planning, where you're gathering requirements and doing the analysis of those requirements, and the testing professionals are working alongside of those team members. Then we shift into execution, just as the life cycle does for the full system. And then we support once it's over. Different technologies that can be used, a Rational Suite, the Mercury Suite, QTP, there's SQL Navigator. There's various different technologies that we employ in-house, and we ensure that as we are going through the discovery phase of working with your organization, that we understand what technologies and tools that you're using, so that way as we're providing the various deliverables and such to you, that it works in your environment. We also leverage industry standards on methods and techniques. So we in turn would be employing the different types of testing, from functional testing, regression, automation, performance, error handling, using different techniques, agile, some of the methodologies that we spoke with, RUP, test, TDD. These are different types of methodologies and techniques that we may employ, again, based on what is most appropriate and most productive to ensure that we're providing you the solution that you're looking for. So now that we kind of have a baseline and we're all grounded, which we're all familiar with what testing is all about, how can we take testing in QA and apply it to the outcome-based testing model? So let's go a little deeper if we can. So as mentioned in initiation, and as Fernando mentioned in step 1, as we evaluate and propose, we would have that on-site discovery effort with you. And during that time, we would sit down and discuss what's appropriate, what is it that you want, what is it that you need. And out of that, we would come up with the acceptance criteria. We would look at what is it that we would need to develop in form of deliverables, when those deliverables would be provided. We will also look at how do you measure the metrics associated with productivity. How do you know that we're progressing? You know, as Fernando said, this is like a factory, so it's off-site to you. So you need some level of assurance that there is progress being made toward the end result. And so in that initiation phase, that's when we would sit down at the table, so to speak, set the rules of engagement, and ensure that we are in full agreement of what does constitute the SLAs, what constitutes that acceptance criteria, looking at what solution that you're proposing. So if we had a hypothetical project as we're defining the acceptance criteria, what that could look like is that we could say, okay, for this particular project, we have 50 requirements that need to be implemented. For those 50 requirements, an outcome-based testing acceptance criterion would be, for each requirement, we could in turn develop two test cases. We could also look at how many test cycles that we could create. We could in turn look at the number of weeks involved, agree to certain time frames, again, based upon your solution. So as we begin to kind of hone in, if you will, on what those particular requirements need to be, agree to that acceptance criteria, accept the standard framework of what we're marching to, we then begin to go into our planning phase. So as we move into the planning phase, as you're all familiar, this is when your business analysts are preparing the user requirements and the functional specifications. The technical team is involved defining the non-functional requirements. They're looking at the requirements. The testing team would be involved to understand how these things are tested, how they need to be tested, what type of test data that needs to be established to begin testing this. And again, we would in turn begin to look at what did we establish in initiation as the acceptance criteria. One common deliverable that would be performed or actually be provided during planning would be the actual test plan. So we would have already discussed in the initiation phase how many test plans, what type of test plans, for example, whether or not we're providing a master test plan with subsequent test plans for various types of testing. We would look at how many, as we defined in initiation, how many test cases that we agree to create based on the number of requirements. So that example would be one positive test case, which tests the requirement just as it is written, and then you would have a negative test case, for example, on this hypothetical project, which could be an error boundary test. It could be where you're validating error messaging. It could be where you're totally putting something in that's totally invalid to that particular field or what have you. So this is where we begin to execute against that acceptance criteria and provide to you the deliverables that we spoke of, and be able to communicate to you various metrics that we've defined to help you measure to ensure that we are producing what we have set out to produce. As we move through to execution, this is where we in turn begin to look at when we're executing. So one of the things that we in turn would ensure that we would establish kind of as a gate, if you will, or governance, we would have a test readiness review between the planning and execution phase. This would be a key gate, if you will, because we would be off-site, because we would be the factory making these things happen for you to ensure that we're ready. This also gives you a checkpoint. As Fernando said in that step 4, that review and adjust period, this gives us an opportunity for us to provide to you what we in turn said that we would be providing, that test plan, the unexecuted test cases during the planning phase would give your internal teams an opportunity to review those items to ensure that they meet your satisfaction before we execute. And so then as we get the acceptance to proceed, or authorization to proceed, if you will, we would then move into execution, where we would begin to execute against those test procedures and the test cases that we would have established during the planning phase. So a hypothetical acceptance criteria here would be if we took those same 50 requirements that were given to us at the beginning, and we said that we would create 100 test cases, 1 positive and 1 negative per requirement. Here is where we would have also established the time frame. So say, for instance, we said we would have 3 test cycles, and it would be to run through 100 test cases per cycle. That would take a week to run through a test cycle. So a metric would be that we would anticipate 20 tests to be executed per day with a total of 100 executed per week. So this is, again, a way for you to be able to measure productivity as we communicate and share with you the status that we're doing, the defects that we're finding, and how many tests we were able to execute. This is a way for you to see, are we progressing against what our SLA that we communicated and agreed upon? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? What's causing the delay? So this gives us an excellent opportunity to communicate on a continuous basis to you against that acceptance criteria. Also during this phase, this is where we began to do defect tracking and provide defect reporting. And again, based upon what we've established in that acceptance criteria, there are multiple ways that we can provide this information to you. It could be via a report, via Excel. It could be a file that could be imported into your systems. Again, different types of options that works for your environment. So after we conclude the execution, this is when we begin to look at support. And so for testing, this here is not really where it ends in some cases. If you have decided that you want us to do some automation, this may be the time that we would implement the creation of those automated scripts. This is when we have more of a stable system in play. And so here it may be determined that we may say, we need you to create from the initiation acceptance criteria 200 test scripts that are automated. Also, this gives us an opportunity to produce to you the results of execution. So here again, that hypothetical project, which we said 50 requirements, 100 test cases, 3 test cycles that we have fully executed, we would in turn give to you 300 sets of test cases that have been ran over those 3 cycles. We would also give to you the test data that we used in each of those various tests that we ran. So this gives you the opportunity to validate, have in your test library and repository We would provide to you your requirements traceability matrix. Again, these are things that we would hand off to you so that you had a mechanism to ensure that we met the criteria in which we established early in initiation as far as acceptance. And so this is what the outcome-based testing fits into the whole life cycle of testing and correlates into the outcome-based model. Now, how do we communicate all of this to you? Because there's a lot going on, and so as Fernando said, it's very different than us providing resources on site to you where you can just go down to their cube or go down to their desk and say, how are we doing with the test? We in turn would send out communication to you. So when we're in execution, we would send out daily communication emails, or however that, again, that we establish in that initiation where we set the rules of engagement. So if you have a SharePoint site, we would be posting to that SharePoint site. If it's an email format, we will send that out. And again, capturing key metrics that we would have established early on relative to how many tests that we plan to execute, what did we execute, how many defects were found, the categorization of those defects, how many were closed, where we stand as far as any showstoppers, issues, things of that nature. So daily you know what's going on when we're executing. On a weekly basis, we again take what's been happening every day and roll that up into a weekly status to communicate again what's going on, what are the activities that we've completed, what are the activities that are currently in progress, what do we plan to do from now to the next reporting cycle? What issues do we have? What resolutions do we have? What action items are outstanding? Who are we needing information from? How are we progressing? And then depending upon the schedule associated with the engagement, there would be monthly status reports. Again, the roll-up, dashboard format, whatever format that suits your organization. We would be communicating key issues and decisions that are made, KPIs, productivity measures, things of that nature. So again, you're fully aware of what's going on, that you're feeling as though that your finger's on the pulse of how we're progressing against your solution. So now that we've talked about the testing life cycle and we've talked about how you in turn take this traditional testing life cycle and push that into the outcome-based model, Fernando now is going to share with you DISYS' experiences on testing, particularly as it relates to the outcome-based testing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tisa. I can see what all those years of experience with testing has done to you. So thank you very much for all this good information. So from here, we're going to be talking about the case studies that DISYS has as far as implementing the outcome-based model to some of our customers nowadays. To start with, we'd like to show the way DISYS has been growing in the testing area, right? So back in 2003, where we were specifically related to our core business for staffing, we started realizing that we had a huge number of people that were SMEs in testing, and we started to create this, out of our innovative culture that we have internally at the company, we started to realize that, well, we have enough information here, and then we can start working on what the testing lifecycle or what the testing services we can start providing for DISYS as a service, not just as staffing. So going to 2007, where we first implemented our deployed US-based TCOE, then we started actually providing as a service and then a full managed life cycle for customers where would be relying in our experience with testing and QA. So we actually refined the techniques that we had internally out of our CME's experiences to manage to have a service that could be provided. And of course, from 2010 up to this point, we have deployed global TCOEs all over the world where we can provide offshore services in India, we can provide nearshore services in Brazil, or even domestically here in the States. So we have a variety of places from where we can provide these services nowadays. So this is how DISYS grew in the testing field. To give some idea about how to implement the model, here we have one of the case studies from one of our customers in the transportation industry, where it has a hybrid model to implement the testing and QA using outcome-based model, right? So Tisa is going to give us some meat about this case study.
Thank you, Fernando. As he mentioned, this was a hybrid solution that DISYS provided to one of our transportation clients. The business challenge or business problem, if you will, was that this was an environment whereby they had a major requirement to develop multiple projects within a program for a new technology that had not existed in their environment. From a testing perspective, there weren't any processes, there weren't any procedures, the tool usage was very minimal, and they in turn had to not only implement this program with 70 or so projects that made up the program, but they also had to implement a process that was repeatable, whereby this program could leverage momentum of this process, and it could be rolled out to future programs that they in turn would head down the path that was coming up. So what DISYS provided to them, again, was a hybrid model. So they started off with the traditional statement of work and time and materials, where a test director and team of individuals were provided to them, dedicated on site to begin to test in real time and work the life cycle, but in addition to that, to begin to provide them some out-based solution items. And so here, alongside of testing and going through the program, DISYS was able to provide to them a testing methodology and approach, which consisted of a procedure manual that they were able to implement and roll out across the organization. Also a model whereby they were able to stand up a testing center of excellence there to where they would have pooled resources within one department that would in turn be matrixed out to the rest of the organization as programs created. They introduced, we at DISYS, we introduced various templates such as a test plan, test case template, the use of tools and how that was implemented, a regression, automated regression suite, various checklists, again, being used on this e-ticketing program project, but that could be leveraged across other programs within the organization. So here again is a case study of where we took a hybrid approach of still providing, because this was an organization that wasn't quite ready to fully outsource their total solution of testing, but we were able to meet their need and in essence provide an approach that was agreed upon by this particular client that consisted of multiple techniques, multiple methodologies, multiple methods, and in turn gave them what they needed to be successful moving forward after this program was done. Now, as I understand, Fernando, you have some experience in out-based testing model in a financial organization.
Yeah, and this is true, and this is very interesting that you mentioned, Tisa, that they were not quite ready to start acquiring outsourced processes, because this case study that we're about to talk in here is when the customer is trying to implement everything internally, but they forget what they are best at. So you're trying to have your product group, you're trying to have your development group, and they're trying to have your testing group internally. And what happens is you don't have the exactly quality of the software that is developed when we're trying to have three groups working at the same time. So the idea here was to understand what the business team, which is like the outcome that they are expecting, what they needed, and then we outsourced for this customer of ours the complete testing life cycle to join and to team up with the development team. So their business needs were in here that they didn't have a good relationship between products and development because they thought the software was never quite good enough. But as a development team, you have to understand the requirements, and you have to also bring it back well tested. So what they had in here was that even developers or even the development team, they were performing the testing internally, and they didn't have that quite understanding about what the testing life cycle should be implemented to make sure the product would be the perfect one. So what we did was, as we implemented the outcome-based model, when we evaluated and when we proposed the solution, we had testing coming up from testing plan, implemented the unexecuted test cases, bringing testing scripts so the internal software development, they could do and run the unit testing with professional testing scripts to make the development life cycle way much better with more quality. So what happened was, once we implemented this independent verification and validation process on top of the software development, we could actually start having metrics and more information on how to improve the software development cycle, which allowed us to streamline from up to 9 cycles of development that they had to only 3, which is the regular that we are always aiming for as far as testing. So this was the best end result that we have here out of all the deliverables that we implemented for this case study of ours. So as we move forward and we wrap up this webinar, we would like to give these last takeaways that we'd like to our audience to take from this discussion. So as pros that we have from our outcome-based model to implement towards testing, we can make sure we don't have upfront costs. So there is a ready-to-go operation just expecting to receive more demand, and this is going to be scalable from the company or client's standpoint. There is no direct burden, so at the moment that you are using your vendor's structure, you don't have to quite infer or take those direct costs that you usually have for equipment, even license. Some of the testing tools that you use, they are very costly some of the times for the number of people that you're going to have using the application. So all this is transferred to your vendor. Of course, you only pay for the satisfactory outcomes. That's the whole purpose of the outcome-based model, and they can be tangible. That's the reason you implement the reporting framework, because you know in a daily basis what's been done, in a weekly basis what's been done, and in a monthly basis you can actually get the deliverables paid. Very important as well, as we discussed in the beginning, risk is transferred to the service provider. It's not that the risk goes away, but it's the point that expert professional is providing you the service, and you can follow productivity. You only charge for that. It's scalable, and the structure is scalable and rewards productivity. So again, Tisa and I don't think we ever mentioned body count or head count in here. We've been always talking about productivity, how much is going to be done, how do you track what's being done, and this is the whole purpose of the model. And then, of course, as you get the service provided by one best practice industry supplier, you get access to that, and actually you get your internal team to be close to the industry best practice. So this is a win-win situation when you outsource something, but you get the knowledge out of what you just outsourced back to your house. Those are the key points that we wanted to discuss as far as the pros. And here I'm giving it back to Angela to move for the questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Tisa. This was fantastic, and I really appreciate your understanding, your expertise at this model, as well as the testing life cycle and how it can be applied there. We do have a couple of questions that came in, so I just want to field those as we wrap up. And the first one is, what would be the first step to getting a project like this started in my organization?
Okay, so the first step, Angela, would be, of course, running with the discovery phase when you're going to evaluate the requirements that you need to implement this structure. So your company needs to realize how productive it's going to be and what are the deliverables that are going to make sense to your structure to receive. So it's going to be a joint work where you're going to sit down with experts from DISYS, for example, and realize how you can engage these deliverables to the methodology that you have in place today. So this is more like a consulting services where the expert come in-house and tell you what you need to do from this point on.
Okay, thanks, Fernando. The next question is, how long does it take to evaluate requirements and come up with acceptance criteria? Maybe Tisa, you want to take that?
Sure. So this clearly depends on the environment, whether or not manual test cases or automated test cases are needed, the number of requirements. But typically, it would overlap with the existing life cycle. So while the initiation phase in-house is going on, this is when we would be engaged in the work alongside. Our intent is not to increase the life cycle because you're deciding on going with an outcome base, but we would work alongside of that solution and define that based on what your goals are.
Okay, excellent, thank you. The next question, it says, is the reporting part of the outcomes I pay for, or is there a separate fee for reporting?
Oh, absolutely no separate fee for that. This is just standard communication. I mean, you expect to know what's going on. So no, there is not an additional fee at all for us communicating to you how you're progressing against your program.
Yeah, and this is also part of the governance model that you have in place. You need to constantly providing reports to your customers so he is sure about the service that he's getting every month, and actually the service that he's paying every month out of the satisfied deliverables that he receives.
Okay, thank you both for that. One other question here is about security. It says, what can I expect as far as firewalling my project and security versus your other projects?
So clearly we would keep each project, each customer is segregated from the others. So we don't commingle the data, we don't commingle the information because confidentiality is very, very key to us.
Excellent.
Usually you have separate networks for the solution that you're providing. So one, for example, testing data that you use for one customer would never be mingled or never even be transferred in the same network as the other customer. So security plays a very big role in this point here. And then, of course, you can actually, one of the things that we do, we invite customers to visit our facilities so they can see actually like real life how we separate both operations. Sometimes can even be physically. People don't actually work at the same environment. They have to be physically divided from each other.
That kind of leads to this next question. Thank you. Is your test factory already implemented and up and running?
Yes, for sure, for sure. So we actually have a testing facility up and running in Brazil. This is the nearshore services solution that we provide to customer. And the reason we have this in Brazil is not only because of the cost effectiveness, but it's also because of the nearshore aspect and the time zone. Because when you're doing development and you can have it like packed, this is one thing. But when you're actually leading the testing and you want to be close to your BAs, you want to be close to your product people inside your organization, it makes sense to have your testing team in a close time zone. And that's the reason DISYS is thinking about having a nearshore structure like in Brazil. So this is from where our services are being provided nowadays.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
The same way it happens, of course, in India. So all the automated testing that Tisa was talking about when you move forward to the support phase, you can have, again, a packed solution when you can actually outsource to an offshore structure, and the next day, literally, you get it all back done when you're back to work. So it makes sense for us to have both operations where we can have one very close to our customer as far as time zone, and the other one which allows a lot of our productivity and, of course, cost effectiveness as well.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. The next question is, do I get any say in who you assign to do the work?
So here, this is where when we are looking at the solutions that's being defined for you, and we're going through the acceptance criteria and SLA, we will present to you the proposed team that would be providing your solution. So we would be providing you the team makeup, the team profile, whether or not we're recommending a nearshore or offshore, maybe it's a combination thereof. So we, in essence, would be providing you with a profile, and you do have that option of looking at resumes to see what qualifications those individuals have relative to working on your project.
Great. Thanks, Tiza. And this last question we have is, are there senior people working on your team?
Oh, of course, of course. I mean, our resources, vary from, as little years as far as 3 to 4 years up to individuals that have more years than my 16. So, so yes, it runs the gamut. It really depends on your needs. It depends on the solution. It depends on the technology. Depends on the industry. There are very many factors that go into identifying the appropriate team profile and makeup. And so all those things would be considered. So you would not have a team of junior individuals. You would have a good mix of a team where you would have senior project program type individuals down to some of your more junior, depending upon the tasks that are at hand.
Okay, and one more question just popped in. Sorry. One more question just popped in. It said, how do you develop the acceptance criteria when you don't know the development process in place at that organization? So how do you know your acceptance criteria is going to work?
Oh, we sit down together to develop that acceptance criteria. We don't go off into another, dimension or sit in Brazil and say, okay, we think that this customer needs this. So this is a joint discussion that we as the vendor sit down with the decision makers in your organization, and we agree together. So we have the right players at the discussion. We agree to what the rules of engagement are. We agree to what's in scope. We agree to the deliverables. We agree to that acceptance criteria, and we're very transparent. We're very, very transparent. We ask questions if we don't have all the information that we need, as you can as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been an excellent discussion, and I just want to wrap it up with one last slide so that people are aware that, again, we will be having a link to the webinar recording emailed out in the next 24 hours. And we do have some other webinars posted. DISYS has done a couple of webinars in the past, and as Fernando mentioned, this was our 4th one. We did start a monthly webinar series this year, so we're excited to be able to post these recordings out on Vimeo.com, and we've provided some links on this slide. Again, I can't thank you enough, Tiza and Fernando, for your time and efforts in giving us this great information and answering these questions. It's been very valuable, and I really appreciate it.
Angela, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Angela.
Thank you. So that concludes our webinar today. Thanks for everyone who's been on the call and the audience. We appreciate your time and efforts as well, and making the time to learn a little bit more about the outcome-based pricing model and how it can be applied to testing and quality assurance. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.